So in our last video lecture for this chapter, we are going to cover a couple of other demand elasticities. The first one is what we call cross-price elasticity of demand. And if you're calculating cross-price elasticity of demand, what you basically want to know is how two goods are related to each other. We already learned in chapter 3 that goods can be related two different ways. They can either be complementary goods or they can be substitute goods. So we can use cross-price elasticity of demand to figure this out. You'll notice that the formula looks pretty much the same as the elasticity of demand. The only difference is we are plugging in the changes in price and changes in quantity demanded for two different goods. So notice that the formula is the percent change in quantity demanded for one good, or good X, divided by the percent change in the other good. Now, when you are calculating cross-price elasticity of demand, you don't want to drop the negative sign because it's actually relevant. That's what's going to tell you whether the goods are substitutes or complements. So if you come up with a positive number, it means that you're dealing with substitute goods. And if you come up with a negative number, it means that the goods are complementary goods. So let's say that we are talking about something like, I'll use my usual example, iPhones and chargers. And let's say that the price of the iPhone increases by 20%, and this causes the quantity demanded of chargers to fall by 10%. So again, we can use this information and plug it into our formula to see the relationship between these two goods. So we would take the percent change in quantity demanded, which was a negative 10%, and divide it by the percent change in the price, which was a positive 20%, and we know we would come up with a negative 0.5. So because we came up with a negative value, we know that iPhones and chargers have a relationship, and that relationship is that they are complementary goods. Let's say that we are looking at the demand for apples and oranges. And the same thing, let's say that the price of apples increases, whoops, let me erase that, okay, price of apples increases by 10%, and that causes the quantity demanded of oranges to rise by 20%. So again, we do the same thing. I'll do it right over here. You take the percent change in quantity demanded for the one good. So we know that our quantity demanded of oranges was increasing by 20%. So we have a positive 20% divided by the percent change in the price, so the price increase of 10% for the apples. So 20% divided by 10%, we come up with the number 2, which is a positive number, which means that apples and oranges are substitute goods. So again, the formula for cross-price elasticity of demand is basically just like elasticity of demand. We're just looking at the relationship between two variables, so you don't want to drop that negative sign. We can also calculate something that's called income elasticity of demand, and this is also a formula where you're not going to want to drop the negative sign because the negative sign is telling you what type of good it is. So what we're examining is how do we change the quantity we demand of a good when we have a change in our income. And so the formula that we use is right here, the percent change in demand for a good divided by the percent change in your income. If you come up with a positive number, that means it's a normal good, and if you come up with a negative number, it means an inferior good. So let's say, for example, that you have an increase, or your income increases by 10%, and that causes the quantity demanded of hot dogs to decrease by 20%. So again, we can use this formula, take the percent change in the quantity demanded of the good, so you have a negative 20% divided by the percent change in your income, which was a positive 10%. So a negative 20% divided by a positive 10%, you're going to come up with a negative 2. And because that number is negative, that means we consider hot dogs to be an inferior good. So again, when you're using the formula for income elasticity of demand, you don't want to drop the negative sign because it tells you whether they're normal goods or whether they are inferior goods. Now, when you calculate the income elasticity of demand, if you come up with a very large value, then what that means is the good is what we call a luxury good. A luxury good is a good or service that will only be purchased when your income level is very high. So let's say, for example, you actually calculated out the income elasticity of demand for 3 different goods. So let's say you had good X, Y, and Z. And let's say the income elasticity of X was 7, the income elasticity of Y was 4, and the income elasticity, of Z is, let's say, 12. And I said which one of these goods is most likely to be the luxury good. You would just choose the good that has the highest income elasticity of demand. So in this case, it would be good Z because it has a greater value than both goods X and Y. The last type of elasticity that we are going to cover is the price elasticity of supply. So we're switching gears now. We're done talking about the demand side. We're now going to look at the supply side. And so just like consumers are responsive to price changes, and that causes us to alter the amount of a good or service that we're going to purchase, firms also have elasticity. They may alter the supply of a good in response to a price change. So by calculating the price elasticity of supply, we can measure how sellers adjust the quantity of the good they offer for sale when that price of that good does change. Now again, look at the formula here. It basically looks just like our formula for elasticity of demand, but instead of having percent change in quantity demanded as our numerator, it's percent change in quantity supplied. So again, you don't have to worry about learning any new complicated formula. It's just the same as the last formula you learned, but now your numerator is measuring the change in quantity supplied. So again, the formula is percent change in quantity supplied divided by the percent change in the price. Now, just like when we talked about elasticity of demand and we said that there were some extreme examples, we also have extreme examples of elasticity of supply. If your firm has a supply curve that is a completely vertical line looking like the one that we see here in graph A, what we refer to that as perfectly inelastic supply. So notice that it doesn't matter if the price is down here or if the price is up here. The firm does not alter the quantity they supply at all. In other words, normally as the price increases, the firm will increase the supply. However, if you have perfectly inelastic supply, and again, it doesn't matter if the price is $100 or $1,000, the firm does not alter the supply. So that's only going to happen in markets where there's a fixed amount of a good that cannot be increased. So you'll notice the example we have here is the supply of Beethoven symphonies. In other words, Beethoven is dead, so we cannot get any more Beethoven symphonies. So it does not matter how high the price goes, a firm has the inability to increase the amount of Beethoven symphonies to sell. We can use Picasso paintings as the same example. It doesn't matter if a Picasso painting goes from $1 million to $2 million, a gallery cannot increase the number that they have because the number of Picasso paintings we have is fixed because he's dead. The other example or extreme example of elasticity would be if we have perfectly elastic supply. So in other words, that would be where you have a completely horizontal line at a fixed price level. And so that's only going to happen in markets where there's a very, very large number of sellers that sell identical products, so no one firm has the ability to influence the price of the product. So generally we think of commodity products or things like food products that are produced globally, where you're going to have that perfectly elastic supply. And we'll talk about that more when we get into our unit on market structures. But for most goods and services, you're going to have an upward sloping supply curve like what we learned about in chapter 3. So what we see here on graph C. What's going to vary is the slope of the supply curve. So the steeper the slope, the more inelastic the supply. In other words, the firm, even though the price is going up, doesn't have the ability to increase the supply by a very large amount. Whereas if you have a flatter supply curve, then that means that the demand is much more elastic, or the supply is much more elastic, so the firm can alter the quantity they supply in response to a price change. So again, if we're looking at this graph here, and I said which one is relatively inelastic and which one is elastic, you would say S3, because that has a flatter slope, that has more elastic supply, and then S1, because it's a steeper slope, that has more inelastic supply. So again, you can just examine the slope itself to determine how elastic or inelastic the supply of that good is. So what are the factors that influence why supply is elastic versus inelastic? You'll recall that we had 3 determinants of elasticity for demand, but when it comes to the supply side of the market, it basically just depends on the time period under consideration. Generally, the shorter the period of time, the more inelastic the supply is, and the longer the period of time, the more elastic the supply is. Now, when we talk about the short run versus the long run, when we're talking about the supply side of the market, it's not a specific set amount of time. When we say that supply is more inelastic in the short run, it's simply because in the short run, the firm has fixed resources that it's dealing with. So it doesn't have the ability to alter the supply as much because it only has so many resources that can be altered. So think about a firm that just has like one factory. So that would be an example of physical capital that is fixed in the short run. And maybe the demand for their good is really high. However, if they're already producing at the maximum output for their factory, then even if the price of the good goes up and up and up, they have the inability to increase the supply of the good. The only way they can increase the supply would be to build another factory. So the time it would take them to build another factory, that would be considered the long run, because in the long run, that's when all of your resources are variable. So those fixed resources that are fixed in the short run, we can alter those in the long run. So again, that's important in understanding why in the short run, supply is more inelastic. It's because firms can't respond to the increase in price because of the capability of their firm in terms of production, whereas in the long run, they can. So again, generally, supply curves in the short run tend to be more inelastic, and supply curves in the long run tend to be more elastic.